These working data centers might be considered the heartbeat of the information age.
Research is exponentially growing the amount of information that's out there.
But new age information is creating some stress on old age infrastructure.
These AI data centers are stealing resources.
We look at the price and the growing protests over the data centers that are serving our insatiable need for instant information.
The push to keep vaccines on the market and clear the way for new ones to combat disease came with a deal that largely exempts vaccine makers from injury lawsuits. Now the pesticide industry is pressuring Congress for similar protections.
Even conservative lawmakers, that these bills are necessary because what's on the line is starvation, according to their story.
This week, the growing concerns over growing safe food for America's table. When we think of oil in California, most of us think of some of the nation's highest prices at the pump. Does California have a lot of oil?
There's a ton of oil, some of the most prolific oil reserves in the world.
Today, with a conflict in the Middle East causing both oil prices and supply to impact all Americans, we look at California's turnabout on oil. Welcome to Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. The explosive growth of artificial intelligence is driving a nationwide surge in massive data centers, power-hungry facilities that consume vast amounts of electricity and water. But communities across the United States are increasingly rising up in bipartisan resistance. The grassroots backlash has turned once quiet server farms into a flashpoint for not in my backyard activism, as Scott Thuman reports.
You might have passed by one of these giant windowless buildings, but it is rare to get an invitation to go inside. Entering through tight security, my camera crew and I want to find out what makes data centers both essential, but also so controversial that they are dominating council meetings across the country. From Texas,
I don't even know if I have the accurate words to convey how mad I am, how upset I am for the future of this town if this goes through. I can't. I'm done.
To Arizona.
These AI data centers are stealing resources. We live in the desert. We can't waste water. They will waste water.
And Northern Virginia.
Data centers are needed. I won't deny that. Again, I use them every day, as do you. I also use the bathroom every day, but I don't want a waste treatment plant in my backyard. So.
First, though, we explore this 112,000 square foot facility owned and operated by NTT Data, a Japanese company that's one of the global leaders in data center development. This place, one of 7 the company has built in Northern Virginia. Behind more locked doors, inside secure cages, we find the vaults, where they house data servers from both private companies and government entities, helping store and process everything from your smartphone videos to medical records and the vast language models used by generative AI. These are really large facilities. Yeah. Bruno Berti is head of product management and strategic alliances for NTT Global Data Centers.
So inside of here, we've got multiple clients that share the space, and you can see the physical security. We separate them all by these physical cages, and we give them access to be inside that space where they can install whatever they need. And like I said, we provide them that power, security, cooling, and connectivity that they need in order to operate their data center.
This is really the epicenter of where everything's happening.
This is where our clients' equipment live, exactly. This is what the data center was designed to do.
But it's how data centers do their vital work that's cause for so much concern. The 2 big things they need are cooling, often with water, and vast amounts of power. A single data center can use enough electricity each year to power 15,000 homes. That's causing worries, especially here in Northern Virginia, with the greatest concentration of data centers in the world. The local power company, Dominion, expects peak demand on its system to double by the year 2039.
From here, you can see that's my house.
Local homeowner Vicki Hugh knows firsthand what greater power needs can mean for suburban communities.
And this will be the center of a power line. They're going to install the stick.
Dominion plans to build a 185-foot tall electrical tower in her backyard to run a 500,000-volt transmission line. She and many of her neighbors are fighting the plan, taking their complaints directly to the Planning Commission in Richmond, Virginia.
We live here before the data center happened, right? So now they build the data center, they want a power line, that's fine. But keep the power line in the data center, because this industrial power line doesn't belong to the existing neighborhood.
NTT Data isn't a customer for the new transmission line, but Vice President of Marketing Stephen Lim understands his industry has a PR problem.
You also get a lot of heat from communities that don't know exactly what you're doing, and they don't necessarily know if they want you here. They worry about power consumption.
Mm-hmm. I think we have invested more over the last couple of years in community outreach and community education than we ever have. I've been in this space for 15 years, and I will say even 6 years ago, 7 years ago, we never thought about it. I think now we are going into the communities much sooner, and there's an education process.
In Georgia, we saw some residents who reported problems. They were talking about issues getting clean drinking water from their wells after a data center was built there, not by NTT. But what do you do to address pollution concerns?
Water utilization is one that gets talked about a lot. What I can speak to is the way that we run and design our buildings now. We use a closed loop water system. So prime the system once and it runs.
Perhaps the biggest concern for local residents, the impact of increasing electrical demand. That's already the case for Americans in 13 states, from New Jersey to Kentucky. As more data centers plug in, there are worries the system just won't be able to meet demand and potentially raise prices for millions of customers.
Taxpayers have sometimes said, well, the infrastructure just to get to a data center, we feel like the data center should be paying more. It shouldn't all come out of our taxes to get this place in a place where you can do business.
It's a fair question. When we build campuses, we'll often put substations on. We're bearing the cost of that. Again, that concept of us showing up and plugging in. And so we are making significant investments in that. It does get challenging because there are certain parts of the infrastructure that we don't control, particularly transmission lines themselves, where we try and partner with the power companies in every region we're in.
What the data center industry has on its side is an enormous amount of money, as companies rush to invest in AI, where the U.S. currently leads, but China is racing to overtake.
Is that because we are doing this all the time and we want everything at our fingertips and society just continues to demand more and more?
Exactly. Research is exponentially growing the amount of information that's out there, which is creating a healthy level of demand. But I think what we've seen in the last few years is AI. And a few years ago, this thing came out called ChatGPT, which opened everyone's eyes to what was really happening for many years before that.
In addition to insatiable demand, the data center industry also has political support in Washington, where President Trump has signed an order to streamline and speed up permitting for large-scale data centers. The administration argues the U.S. needs to stay ahead of China for economic and national security reasons, all of which is unlikely to stop public concern and demand for more studies into the health effects of data centers. The project in Chandler, Arizona that these residents came to oppose was ultimately rejected by the council last December. The data center plans in College Station, Texas, that led some residents to consider leaving,
I'll be honest, if you guys push this through, we're moving,
was also rejected by its city council. But elsewhere, dozens of others have been approved as this digital divide continues to grow.
What's the national picture look like on all that?
Well, the opposition is significant, and we did a pretty deep dive here, and we found that there are at least 30 states where there's local and state opposition that's significant enough that they've had to either cancel or delay some of these projects. Now, there were 10 states where they have had these statewide or county level proposals for moratoriums on any new construction at all. But we only found in 3 states, Indiana, Missouri, and Michigan, where parts of the state have actually banned construction for new data centers.
Really interesting story. Thanks for doing that, Scott. And coming up, pesticide makers seeking immunity from injury lawsuits. There's an uproar over President Trump's recent executive order impacting a widely used weed killer linked to cancer. It could give immunity to makers of Roundup and dozens of other products. The debate crosses party lines, with some farmers siding with the industry. But health advocate Leah Wilson says giving the pesticide industry immunity would be hazardous to our health.
What if I told you that there's a coordinated effort to stop food reform in the U.S., and that effort is being carried out by the big chemical industry to make sure that they don't lose their market share of the food market?
Leah Wilson heads the nonprofit Stand for Health Freedom. She says the pesticide industry is pressing hard for exemption from liability lawsuits modeled after protections the vaccine industry convinced Congress to pass 40 years ago.
They heard a story from the industry that, look, if you don't protect us from these really expensive lawsuits, the products are going to be sued out of existence. And that would leave America's children ripe for disease. It would create a national security threat. So we need you, Congress, and you, President Reagan at the time, to pass a bill that says you cannot sue vaccine makers.
The controversial National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986 largely exempts vaccine makers from liability for injuries such as brain damage blamed on a childhood DPT vaccine for diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus.
What we saw after 1986, when that law was put into place to protect the vaccine industry, was, like I mentioned, a seismic shift in power. And what that looked like was the childhood schedule, which was what was protected, became this golden opportunity for the industry. If you can get a product on the childhood schedule, then not only can you know that you're not going to have the budget item to continue to make the product safer, to defend lawsuits, but you also have a mandate for school children across the U.S. And that meant every year doses were being added to the schedule.
She says that resulted in an explosion in vaccines and related alleged injuries that industry now cannot be held responsible for. Today, pesticide interests are lobbying for similar actions that they claim are needed to protect America's food production. They argue that lawsuits alleging health dangers like cancer from glyphosate and Roundup threaten food production because large-scale efficient farming requires weed and pest control chemicals. In February, President Trump issued an executive order under the Defense Production Act to boost production of the chemical to protect America's food supply. It gives some immunity. Experts say it's not a blanket shield, only for acts related to complying with the order. Its impact is uncertain. The EPA has long insisted glyphosate is safe when used as directed and that Roundup doesn't need cancer warnings. Yet the company recently proposed a $7.25 billion class action settlement for current and future cancer claims and has already paid out over $11 billion. New concerns are spurred by the recent retraction of a pivotal 2000 study. It was long cited as proof that Roundup is safe, but now it's been pulled for flaws and ethical lapses, including that Monsanto sponsored and ghost-wrote the study, selectively used data, then held out the results as independent. The Modern Ag Alliance, founded by Roundup's maker, is pressing for state and federal laws that say EPA warnings on pesticide labels are enough to avoid lawsuits.
They're running TV ads, they're running commercials in these states that have the bills.
Glyphosate has probably been one of the greatest things that's happened to the American farmer and around the world.
Glyphosate is a tool that has allowed us to produce more with less.
It's actually helped increase our yields.
So that's how they've been convincing even conservative lawmakers, that these bills are necessary because what's on the line is starvation, according to their story.
Are they correct that if they stop making these chemicals that are so valuable to farmers trying to grow a lot of food, that we're going to be in trouble?
Bayer Monsanto has already reformulated some of their products, and we know they are capable of reformulation. The question is, will they do it? And there are also other products that farmers might be able to use. And when we talk to farmers who have transitioned from this monoculture pesticide farming to regenerative or to organic, to be closer to the land or to how nature does it, they'll tell you that it's a transition and that it's not easy, but it's possible.
What is regenerative food?
Regenerative is getting back to really the respect for land and nature and the symbiotic relationship, as opposed to monoculture, chemical farming, where they do a single crop on a big field. They focus on things like cover crop and the symbiotic relationship with the animals and the plants and the natural way for things to feed off of and flourish together.
A bipartisan group in Congress is pushing to try to reverse President Trump's executive order and ensure that injured people can sue pesticide makers. Coming up on Full Measure, oil irony in the Golden State. $50,000 barrels a day of oil are now flowing from a once shuttered oil operation offshore from Santa Barbara, California. That's due to an executive order President Trump signed in March, but it's not enough to solve California's broader energy crisis. For decades, California leaders have demonized the oil industry while sitting on some of the richest reserves in the U.S. Now the chickens have come home to roost and there are serious shortages, so the state finds itself in an ironic position, having to alter its long-standing push to drive fossil fuel companies out. Years of aggressive green policies have chased oil producers out of California. Now the state is in crisis, importing record amounts of foreign oil and grappling with escalating fuel prices. Does California have a lot of oil?
There's a ton of oil, some of the most prolific oil reserves in the world. We've been at it for 140 years, and we've only gotten a small percentage of the crude's out there. We know where the crude is. We know how to get it. We just can't get permission to go get it.
Rock Zierman heads up the California Independent Petroleum Association.
The state has a stated policy that by 2045, all fossil fuel producing companies are going to be out of business in California.
I mean, they won't be allowed to operate?
Won't be allowed to operate, even though we'll continue to consume fossil fuels even in 2045 when the state hopes we're carbon neutral.
So in part, at least, it's the green agenda that's chasing these oil companies out?
Right, and I think if we were actually getting a tangible benefit from all of this cost, from all this uncertainty, from people losing their jobs, from local governments losing a tax base, if somehow that was the cost of solving global greenhouse gas emissions, people might be comfortable with that, but it's not.
California Governor Gavin Newsom has put a target on the back of the oil industry since he was first elected.
For decades and decades, the oil industry has been playing each and every one of us in this room for fools. They've been buying off politicians. They've been denying and delaying science and fundamental information that they were privy to, that they didn't share or they manipulated. Their deceit and denial going back decades has created the conditions that persist here today.
But an attitude adjustment was required after a critical tipping point. Phillips 66 closed its Los Angeles County refinery at the end of 2025, and Valero Energy announced plans to shutter its refinery near San Francisco by the end of this month. That will leave California with just 6 refineries, down from more than 40 in the 80s. Gas prices were already 50% above the national average and headed higher, and California has had to quench its energy thirst with foreign oil that was recently supplying 64% of the state supply.
Half of all Ecuadorian crude in the Amazon rainforest comes to California. And the reason for that is because we've had a hard time getting permits out of the state government to drill for additional oil in California. So as a result, even though we're under the strictest rules and regulations on the planet when it comes to production, we're outsourcing our sources of crude to places that don't have any environmental rules or regulations, don't have labor regulations, human rights violations.
Don't Texas and Louisiana have crude oil?
They do, but there's no way to get it to California. So you either have to get it here by ship or by pipeline. There are no pipelines for mid-continent to California, and the Jones Act, which regulates shipping, prevents crude from Texas and mid-continent from coming to California. So if we don't produce it here, it has to come from a foreign country.
Has consumption of oil decreased in California during this time period?
Not even by a drop. It is true that gasoline has gone down slightly, but it's been more than made up by jet fuel increases.
In a frenetic last-second deal last fall, Governor Newsom and Democrat leaders took emergency action, extending the legislative session to pass a bill that fast-tracks environmental reviews and pre-approves up to 2,000 new oil wells a year in Kern County, producer of 75% of California's oil. Are there ironies here in the fact that California has, in essence, shunned the oil industry in a way, and now may be looking at trying to attract and convince and woo the oil industry?
I mean, we've been having this conversation for over a decade that this crisis is coming. It was ignored, but the crisis is now here and it needs to be solved. And I think the one thing that is unavoidable is when California consumers, California voters are facing higher gasoline prices than anywhere else in the country, that motivates them to demand from their legislators that the problem get fixed. And so that was ignored when we were going out of business, our workers were going out of business, our local governments were losing tax base. But once the refiners started going out of business, it could no longer be ignored.
Zierman says it's a national security issue, too. California and its 41 military installations are indirectly using Russian oil refined in India. After a break, what's ahead next week on Full Measure? Coming up next week on Full Measure, it's been a controversy spanning 2 decades.
What would you say for people not following the controversy over stock purchases?
We have multiple members of Congress who are performing 40% better than the S&P. This is the definition of insider trading.
The latest efforts to clamp down on members of Congress profiting from their positions legally, but many say questionably, next week on Full Measure. Until then, we'll be searching for more stories that hold powers accountable. Thanks for watching. I'm Sharyl Attkisson.